The devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, ripped through America's peacetime complacency. It exposed a gaping void in its intelligence apparatus. As the USS Arizona burned, claiming nearly half of the more than 2,000 lives lost that day, the nation recoiled from the horror. It confronted an urgent, terrifying truth. America was blind. A robust, real-time intelligence capability was no longer a luxury. It was a matter of national survival. But where would such specialized talent be found? In this crucible of crisis, the U.S. Navy, under the pragmatic leadership of Rear Admiral Lee Noyes, turned to an unconventional solution. In September 1941, Noyes initiated a groundbreaking experiment. He dispatched a secret letter to Ada Comstock, the formidable president of Radcliffe College. He sought not men, but bright, close-mouthed native students to train in cryptanalysis. He believed that in the event of total war, women would be needed for this work, and they could do it probably better than men. This marked the genesis of a clandestine recruitment effort. By November, the hushed corridors of Wellesley College saw astronomy professor Helen Dobson sending secret letters to seniors. She invited them to private interviews about a mysterious, imparting something second to Professor Helen, vital wartime role. These invitations, followed by clandestine meetings in locked rooms, quickly spread. They went to other elite Seven Sisters colleges, drawing in young women, like 16-year-old Edith Reynolds from Vassar. They were plunged into the arcane history of codes and ciphers. Their training was rigorous and cloaked in absolute secrecy. Students pulled strips of paper through holes cut in cardboard for cipher practice. Their homework was hidden under desk blotters or behind quilts strung across their rooms. They mastered root transposition, polyalphabetic substitution, and the Vigenère square. Their liberal arts educations, rich in foreign languages, science, and math, proved surprisingly fertile ground for the complex logic of code-breaking. As the war intensified, the net widened, extending beyond elite institutions to humbler teaching colleges across the country. Dorothy Romale, a math student from Indiana State Teachers College, answered the call. Her childhood dreams of a world beyond her small town, inspired by Amelia Earhart flying overhead, were suddenly within reach. Her father, proud of his 3 daughters, encouraged her ambition. By September 1943, the Army, too, was actively recruiting. Dot Braden, a Randolph-Macon Women's College graduate and teacher, found herself applying for an unknown position. It was in the soaring lobby of the Virginian Hotel in Lynchburg. She then embarked on an exciting, if uncertain, train journey to Washington, D.C., joining the more than 10,000 women who would ultimately converge on the Capitol, lending their sharp minds to the war effort. Their initial lives in Washington and at colleges were marked by wartime austerity, rolling bandages, sewing blackout curtains, scarce meat, and cold dorm rooms. With harbor lights doused against lurking U-boats, the urgent demands of a global war, coupled with the limitations of existing male code-breaking resources, had created an unexpected opportunity. In the fall of 1941, secret letters continued to appear in college mailboxes, summoning young women to clandestine meetings. Harvard astronomy professor Donald Menzel served as the Navy's point person for recruitment. While U.S. Navy code-breaking unit outlined the desired qualifications, building the code-breaking unit outlined the desired qualifications. Safford's criteria, however, revealed the biases of the era, explicitly excluding fifth columnists, pacifists, and those from persecuted nations or races, Czechoslovakians, Poles, Jews. Yet, leaders like Radcliffe's Ada Comstock quietly facilitated recruitment, even including Jewish women. While Barnard's Dean Virginia Gildersleeve championed the need for trained brains, a critical turning point occurred at Mount Holyoke, where leaders from 7 women's colleges convened to collaborate on war efforts. Rigorous secret courses using Navy-developed materials, like Guide for Instructors and texts such as Treatise on Cryptography, commenced in late 1941 and early 1942. Menzel personally taught the Radcliffe contingent. The selection was stringent. A Radcliffe administrator once critiqued a student's perceived lack of gumption. The high stakes of secrecy were dramatically underscored in February 1942. when Brown and Pembroke colleges were blacklisted from the program, after a professor, described as having a bit in his teeth, indiscreetly boasted about the secret course. By March 1942, women were deeply engaged in their studies, their performance exceeding expectations. Menzel reported positively on the Radcliffe women, noting that his star student had surpassed all men in a Harvard Japanese course. By mid-May, 25 Radcliffe women were certified for naval work, with Lieutenant Commander Ralph S. Hayes anticipating a continued demand for high-grade women. The first wave of Navy-recruited women began their duties in Washington, D.C. in June 1942. Their new reality was stark. Crowded offices often meant sitting on upturned wastebaskets. They received dire warnings about treason, facing potential execution if they revealed their work. Privacy was scarce, exemplified by Edith Reynolds, the Vassar recruit, waking in her street-level room without curtains to a stranger tipping his hat. Housing shortages were so severe that many resorted to hotbedding, sharing beds in shifts. To maintain secrecy, women developed ingenious cover stories, telling outsiders they were just emptying trash cans or merely playthings, and even devised a vodka Collins signal to warn each other of danger in public. Suzanne Harpole's return, to find her room occupied by a military officer and his mistress, further highlighted the chaotic wartime living conditions. The work itself, while often initially very tedious, as recalled by Anne Cara Christie, involved complex cryptanalysis, traffic analysis, and using collateral information to break codes like the German Enigma ciphers and various minor systems. The American code-breaking operation grew larger than even Bletchley Park, where thousands of women operated Bornba machines. This was a collective, team-based effort. Not the domain of solitary male geniuses, a myth their work directly debunked. Despite the crucial nature of their contributions, inter-service rivalry was rampant. Prescott Currier noted, nobody cooperated with the army under pain of death. British liaisons observing the Americans sometimes dismissed them as just a lot of kids playing at office. The psychological strain was immense. Louise Pearsall, a mathematician on the Enigma project, suffered a breakdown. Women also grappled with the paradox of the release a man to fight mandate, knowing their work saved lives even as it freed men for combat. Anne Cara Christie remembered a collegial atmosphere where competition was focused on solving problems rather than personal gain, as most women viewed their wartime service as temporary. Before the war, societal pressures had heavily steered educated American women towards marriage and domesticity, often portraying it as their primary career. Wellesley College, for example, offered lectures on marriage as a career, while its yearbook symbolically awarded the class's first bride a bouquet. The job market for educated women remained a tiny universe, with opportunities often limited to lower-paying roles like teaching, a path many felt they had to fall back on. The attack on Pearl Harbor dramatically altered this landscape. Suddenly, educated women, previously overlooked, were wanted for their minds. Military and intelligence agencies quickly realized that women's traditional educational backgrounds, including languages, literature, ancient texts, and music, had cultivated aptitudes like close reading, pattern recognition, and meticulousness, which were surprisingly well suited to cryptanalysis. Skills from librarianship and even shorthand, a very real kind of code, proved invaluable. Furthermore, women were perceived as more discreet than young men. An internal army memo noted that youth was a time for sowing of wild oats, and under the influence of women and liquor, much is said that the speaker would not dream of saying, when uninfluenced. This realization led to a massive mobilization of women into code-breaking operations. The U.S. Army's code-breaking office at Arlington Hall grew from 181 people before Pearl Harbor to nearly 8,000 by 1945, with approximately 7,000 of them being women, nearly 70% of the total. The U.S. Navy's code-breaking force similarly expanded, from a few hundred to 5,000 domestic codebreakers, at least 80% of whom were female. In total, women comprised roughly 11,000 of the 20,000 American codebreakers during the war, transforming them from niche roles into a dominant force, often referred to as 28 Acres of Girls. As J.N. Cos, a code-breaking librarian, recalled, "They sucked us out from all over the country." Braden, a determined blue-eyed country, brown-haired teacher from Virginia, was one such woman. In September 1942, she found herself overwhelmed by the chaos of Chatham High School. Teaching everything from English and French to ancient history, civics, hygiene, and calisthenics, a challenging bump in the road during a time of chronic teacher shortages. Exhausted, declared to her spirited and unsinkable mother, Virginia Mima Braden, "I am never going back to that school. I am not. It will kill me." Her mother, always encouraging new opportunities, suggested a mysterious government recruiter at the Virginian Hotel. On a cool Monday morning, with the hint of autumn in the air, Dot presented herself, packing 2 small hardback suitcases containing all her clothes. Gas and tires were rationed, making long-distance travel difficult, and she departed for Washington, D.C. on October 11, 1943. Unsure what cryptography meant, but proud of her new government job, her crowded train journey filled with servicemen reflected the pervasive wartime atmosphere, and her arrival at Washington Union Station, an imposing edifice of marble and white granite, underscored the nation's resolve. After a taxi ride through Washington, D.C.'s monumental core, past the Capitol and Washington Monument, and across the symbolic Arlington Memorial Bridge, Dot arrived at Arlington Hall Monument Memorial Bridge. This former finishing school, with its elegant L-shaped creamy yellow brick building, Ionic columns, French doors, and gracious central staircase, had been requisitioned for intelligence work. Now surrounded by a high, unto-bear, terrifying wire, it functioned as the world's largest clandestine message center. Dot's initial nervousness at the gate gave way to a frightening finality, as she signed loyalty and secrecy oaths committing to a life of discretion, where she would constantly monitor her own behavior. However, a sudden housing crisis emerged. Dot was shocked to learn she had to find her own lodging, prompting an embarrassing call to her mother, Virginia, who promptly offered financial support. This widespread issue led to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt's initiative to create Arlington Farms of Toki, nicknamed Girl Town, or 28 Acres of Girls, designed to house 7,000 female war workers across 10 flimsy temporary dormitories, each holding about 700 women. The compound appeared as ugly temporary structures arranged in rows. Despite the hastily built grey appearance, WPA murals adorned the walls, and amenities like communal bathrooms and laundry sinks were provided for the $24.50 monthly rent. It was here, in room I-106, that Dot formed an immediate bond with a fellow recruit, Liz, amidst the diverse community of women. William J. Bissell, head of Arlington Farms, defended the easy fraternization between residents and soldiers, acknowledging its unique social dynamics. Dot's workplace was Building B at Arlington Hall, an aerodynamic structure resembling a giant comb with wings. Optimized for clandestine work, inside, hundreds of women, almost all women, were crammed, working with graph paper, cards, pencils, and strange typewriters, tabulating and punch card machines. The air was filled with a constant low murmur punctuated by the noise of large 6-foot fans that also blew paper around. Thin strips of paper hung from lines like drying pasta, representing the raw intercepted messages, originating from Nazi Germany, Japan, Italy, Vichy France, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and even neutral countries like Switzerland. The operation was fashioned after an assembly line, requiring immense patience and precision. After an initial assignment sorting messages, which brought one recruit to tears from the pressure, Dot received her critical posting, Department K, Section B2, with the one-word assignment Crypt. Her task was to break codes related to Japanese merchant ship movements in the Pacific. This work was vital, directly enabling the Allies to intercept and decrypt enemy communications, leading to sinking ships and severing the enemy's lifeline of food, fuel, and other critical supplies. Among these women was Ruth Weston, a talented and composed pianist, whose unflappable nature was once demonstrated. When she calmly flicked a June bug off her back during a recital without missing a note, her family, staunchly American, nevertheless encountered scrutiny due to their German roots. After her father suffered a stroke, Ruth found teaching to be a respectable way of starving to death, a profession ill-suited to her shyness. Her quiet determination, however, led her to Washington, D.C., following extensive FBI background checks, where she acquired the nickname Crow due to a misspelling of her name. Braden, similarly drawn from her remote, similarly drawn from her remote, and similarly drawn from her remote, rural hometown, sought to escape a life, not sitting on a cushion and sewing a fine seam. Driven by a desire to serve and a sense of adventure, she left behind family struggles and the chaos of multiple brothers shipping out to military service, a common experience during the Depression. Both women were recruited into the Japanese Army code-breaking effort at Arlington Hall. They quickly forged a close friendship, sharing confidences in their shared bed and finding humor in the small details of wartime life, like their mouths freezing from eating rationed frozen peaches, or a running joke about a friend's mother saving fatback. Their work was demanding, often involving 8-hour shifts, followed by long walks home in the rain, all while living under the constant fear of letting something slip. Their one-bedroom apartment became crowded when Ruth's older sister, Louise, arrived in Washington, seeking government work. Her unspeakably country appearance, a stark contrast to the sophisticated city girls. To contextualize their vital, yet often mundane work, the code-breaking women attended the This Is Our War lecture series at Arlington Hall. On September 7, 1943, Admiral Joseph R. Redman, Director of Naval Communications, delivered the Navy attacks, vividly describing the Pacific Ocean as bigger than anything the women had seen or could imagine. A vast expanse that took about 3 weeks to get from San Francisco over to Japan. He used the metaphor of finding a needle in a haystack to describe locating enemy ships, stressing that their dull work was very exciting to someone else, and that a delay of a few hours could critically impact operations. Major General Wilhelm D. Steyer, Chief of Staff of the Army Service Forces, followed with Fighting to Win, illustrating the U.S. Army's global expansion. He offered pointed observations on foreign populations, describing Chinese soldiers as considerably smaller in stature but very stocky and fine-looking, while others do not look like a happy people, sullen, look like they lack ambition. Concluding that such sights made one proud of the fact that you are an American, Q. H. Clegg, Assistant Director of the FBI, presented the enemy in our midst, half-jokingly admitting, immediately upon arrival, I was threatened regarding agency competition in recruiting. The most unsettling lecture came from Charles Taft, Director of the Office of Community War Services. Titled America at War, Taft, startled by the sheer number of women in one place, described America now, was one roiling mass of chaos due to industrialization. He focused on wartime social problems, particularly those concerning women, noting that 20% of women in factories had young children, leading to troubling kinds of problems like children running amok. He discussed childcare options, while also acknowledging the natural feeling of mothers that their own child Little Johnny, caused no trouble, unlike Little Willie. Taft then vividly detailed predatory women and camp followers, spreading prostitution and promiscuity at Cincinnati's Union Terminal, where girls would wander around and find themselves a soldier and go out and sit in the park. The lecture ended with the women singing the Star-Spangled Banner, a poignant close to a presentation that highlighted deep societal anxieties about women's newfound agency and changing morality. Amidst the war's demands and societal shifts, Dot's personal life became complicated. In December 1943, approximately 2 months after arriving in Washington, she received an engagement ring from George Rush, who had entered the Army in April 1942 and was now stationed in California. However, the ring's arrival was not welcome, as Dot never truly considered herself engaged and disliked being pressured. When George unexpectedly showed up on her doorstep to propose elopement, her sister Virginia Braden literally sat on Dot's suitcase to prevent her from leaving. and Dot even threw a corsage George had sent against the wall in frustration. Simultaneously, Dot navigated relationships with other men. Jim Bruce, an army meteorologist, became a steady and reassuring suitor. Though he had a rowdy crowd of drinkers for friends, Dot worried about friends of George Rush seeing them together. Another correspondent was Curtis Paris, a soldier stationed in San Francisco, who exchanged letters and a photo with Dot. His letters, filled with greetings and salutations, and stuff and junk, praised the faint aroma of apple blossom of her replies. He wrote of getting some good muscles and humorously noted that a ploughed football field made him sure I know what Flanders Field looked like. Upon receiving Dot's photo, he exclaimed, "The picture, wow." I was never more pleased in my life, noting how the fellows all looked it over and seemed astounded at the Virginia talent, and planned to frame it for moral support to the military personnel around my bunk. Letter writing was the primary mode of communication for those separated by the long distances of land and ocean, though these letters were subject to a censorship department. And the adage, "loose lips sink ships," was ever present. Weary mothers wrote to faraway sons, and now faraway daughters, late at night, while young women scribbled on crowded city buses. Long-distance calls were expensive and often inaccessible, with dorms and boarding houses, like Fillmore Gardens, having only a sole telephone in the basement. The social scene in Washington, D.C., a hub for soldiers and officers, involved dancing and mixers, but also led to concerns about G-girls, government girls, who, according to a magazine quote, can get a wonderful job, but they can't get a wonderful man. Dot sometimes used George's engagement ring to fend off men or for keeping dates light and tentative. The war's reality was never far from their daily lives. Orders for soldiers like Jim Bruce were often dispatched and changed at the last minute to keep the enemy from anticipating troop movements. Jim's spontaneous drive to see Dot before shipping overseas resulted in a hasty farewell, made more poignant when Dot later discovered another girl calling him, indicating the transient and complex nature of wartime relationships. Security at Arlington Hall was so tight that it was difficult for outsiders to get calls through. Air raid sirens would sometimes go off, signaling residents to turn off their lights and pull down their blackout shades. During one such incident, Dot, Crow, and a friend named Bill Randolph sat on their porch in the darkness, singing into the night. A moment of poignant juxtaposition between the global conflict and their personal lives. Ultimately, life was strange now, and often oddly pleasant. Even as Dot kept big framed photographs of her brothers, T.D. and Bubba, and George Rush and Jim Bruce, and worried about all of the men in her life all the time. The war thus fostered unprecedented independence and agency for women in vital roles, challenging traditional gender norms even as deep societal anxieties persisted, shaping their lives in profound and often contradictory ways. The intimate struggles and quiet triumphs of women like Dot Braden and Ruth Weston, navigating the complex tapestry of wartime Washington, were but threads in a much larger, clandestine design. Their meticulous, happy enough idiocies and intent, often tedious work in the humming halls of Arlington Hall, deciphering enemy communications, was not merely a job, it was the unseen fulcrum upon which the fate of battles and indeed the war itself often turned. Every decrypted message, every pattern recognized, translated into a tangible, devastating impact on the enemy, and a lifeline for Allied forces. The intelligence these women produced, often compiled into the vital magic summaries, became the very compass guiding Allied military operations. Particularly across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, would later reveal the profound depth of this advantage, stating that operations in the Pacific are largely guided by the information we obtain of Japanese deployments. It was a wealth of information painstakingly extracted by thousands of anonymous hands that allowed American commanders to anticipate, to plan, and to strike with unparalleled precision. The consequences were staggering. Major General Stephen Chamberlain would unequivocally declare that this intelligence saved many thousands of lives in the Pacific and shortened the war by no less than 2 years. Representative Clarence Hancock, speaking on the House floor, echoed this sentiment. commending their efforts that saved thousands of precious lives. This was not hyperbole, it was a verifiable truth. In one critical instance, intelligence derived from their work led to the total interception and destruction of a massive convoy. Carrying 40,000 Japanese troops, reinforcements desperately needed for Leyte, a silent, devastating victory, achieved not with bullets and bombs, but with intellect and ingenuity. These were the pencil-pushing mamas, as some affectionately called them, who were, quite literally, sinking the shipping of Japan and crippling its war machine. In the Atlantic, their relentless pursuit of German Enigma ciphers proved equally crucial, tearing back the veil on Nazi submarine movements and protecting Allied convoys running the gauntlet of U-boats. This monumental collective effort by women transformed them from mere placeholders for men into active, indispensable war agents. They demonstrated, beyond any doubt, their intellectual and operational capabilities in critical national security roles. This quiet revolution fundamentally challenged the prevailing, male-dominated narrative of military contributions, a myth that had long omitted or downplayed their crucial, often pioneering role in intelligence and code-breaking. Beyond the immediate victories, their clandestine work laid the foundational groundwork for the future of national security itself. The methods and insights developed by these women advanced signals intelligence to an unprecedented degree, effectively laying the nascent framework for modern cybersecurity and the burgeoning computing industry. It was during this period that cryptanalysis made a significant, albeit largely unrecognized, leap. The ability to reconstruct enemy machines from intercepted messages became possible, a technical marvel that transcended mere decryption. These women, in their secret offices, were helping to found the very field of clandestine eavesdropping, shaping the early culture and capabilities of what would eventually become the National Security Agency, NSA. Yet, despite their profound and undeniable impact, the women codebreakers' contributions remained shrouded in absolute secrecy, a condition they swore to uphold under threat of execution. This secrecy, while essential for national security, came at a heavy cost. It prevented public recognition for their breakthroughs and the thousands of lives they saved. It also exacerbated the petty yet persistent inter-service rivalries over credit for deciphering, leading to an almost absurd compromise of dividing credit by day. The Army claiming odd days, the Navy even. This hidden nature of their crucial work meant that the broader public remained largely unaware of their existence, let alone their genius. Nevertheless, their success fundamentally challenged deeply entrenched societal norms. It demonstrated, unequivocally, that women could not only excel but lead in highly technical and strategic roles, previously considered exclusively male domains. The very idea that women are inherently bad at keeping secrets was debunked by their flawless performance in the most sensitive of national security tasks. For many, the experience provided an unprecedented period of independence and professional development, irrevocably altering their life trajectories. They found purpose, camaraderie, and a profound sense of self-worth in a career that had been unimaginable just years before. This was a rare, unprecedented moment, where educated women were actively sought and fiercely competed for, not for their domestic skills but for their minds. Even if many of the gains in gender equality were viewed as temporary by some at the time, their indelible mark on both the war's outcome and the trajectory of women's professional roles was undeniable, a silent but seismic shift in the landscape of American society.